All right, so let's get going on today's class. So what we're going to do today is we're going to take a look at Chapter 7. This is now when we're getting into the theories of operant conditioning. So much like what we did in the first half of the course where we took a look at classical conditioning and then we looked at phenomenon and theories of classical conditioning, we have introduced the basics of operant conditioning, and now we're looking at the theories about operant conditioning. And today we're going to start off with looking at schedules of reinforcement. So schedules of reinforcement, as we're going to find, are going to be a powerful tool to explain learned behavior. So there are some phenomena of behavior that we don't know, or we would not know where they came from if it was not for the analysis of schedules of reinforcement. So for example, if you are a gamer or you yourself know a gamer, you know that they do not like to interrupt their gameplay when they're trying to get to a particular goal. So there has been time and time again, I'm sure, when parents were telling their children, we have to go, we have to leave, it's time. And the kids were just like, just let me get this last, I'm so close to the level up, let me just kill this final boss. And you can pause the game. There's a number of games now. It's not the dark ages back in the Nintendo area where it was impossible to do that stuff. You can now pause your game. So you can just pause your game and say, I'll come back to this, when the other stuff is done. But time and time again, you will find that gamers are very unwilling to interrupt their play. So we're going to take a look at why is that the case. Why does this particular type of behavior that seems illogical come into play? And it has to do with schedules of reinforcement. We're also going to take a look at schedules of reinforcement as they apply to somewhat addictive behaviors. So we already saw the example of slot machines. Slot machines are on a particular type of schedule of reinforcement, and that is one of the reasons why people will stay at a slot machine and play it again and again and again and again and again and again and again. And they will not take breaks. It's very rare that somebody will break from playing their slot machine. We probably, hopefully none of us here are addicted to gambling, but many of us have apps on our phone that use the same principles. So if you play a game like Candy Crush or any of the other kind of phone apps, Angry Birds, any of those ones, I don't know what the latest huge ones are. But anyways, if you play these apps, you will know that it is very difficult to put them down. It's very difficult to stop playing those. And anybody who's ever said to themselves, you know what, I've done a lot of homework, I'm going to take a 10-minute break and I'm just going to play this game. And then 2 hours later, you're sitting there going, I better get back to my homework. But just one more level, let me try this next one. You've experienced the effects of this schedule of reinforcement. We're going to take a look at a schedule of reinforcement that used to be the way that Facebook and other social media platforms operated, and will possibly once again be the way that these social media platforms operate, that causes you to periodically check up on these, but not to religiously or continuously check up on them. So we know that people, when they check up on their social media feeds, they don't do it all the time outside of their birthday, but they do it at a steady rate that is kind of slower paced. And we'll see that they do that because of the schedule of reinforcement inside of these social media platforms. And then lastly, we're going to take a look at why, if you are trying to monitor somebody's behavior to make sure that they have good behavior, it is very ineffective to monitor that behavior at regular intervals. So if a parent wants their children to engage in positive play behavior rather than yelling, rather than fighting, we're going to see why reinforcing this at set intervals, such as at every 10-minute intervals, is completely ineffective at making sure your children play like this rather than actually play like this. So all of these behavior patterns we're going to see can be understood from the schedules of reinforcement that cause those particular behaviors. And that's going to be the focus of what we're looking at today. So we're going to introduce the idea of continuous versus intermittent schedules of reinforcement. We're going to take a look at the 4 basic intermittent schedules. These are the 4 that are the most common, the most widely studied. And then we're going to end it by taking a brief look at non-contingent schedules. And we're going to take a look at, number 1, that they are ineffective. And number 2, that we're going to try to critically think about an alternative explanation for what was mentioned in your textbook, where after a guaranteed contract, the performance of major league pitchers who have dedicated their lives to baseball, the performance of them measured in mean innings pitched decreases after they sign that guaranteed contract. Basically, after they are on a non-contingent schedule of reinforcement, you don't have to perform to get those bonuses, their performance actually decreases. So we'll see why that is possibly the case and see if we can come up with some alternative explanations. All right, schedules of reinforcement. So up until now, we've been talking about schedules of reinforcement, and we've kind of been implying a continuous schedule of reinforcement. And what a continuous schedule of reinforcement is, it's kind of right there on the name. It's where every single operant response is reinforced. So for the rat here pressing the bar, every single bar press ends up in food. A vending machine is hopefully on a continuous reinforcement schedule, where every single time you pay the money and press the buttons, you get a reward. You get your candy or your chips or whatever it is that you were buying. So a continuous reinforcement schedule is where each and every single time that you do that operant behavior, you get reinforced for that operant behavior. The new thing we're going to introduce today is the idea of the intermittent reinforcement schedule. And this is where not every response gets reinforced, but only some of the responses get reinforced. You only get reinforced every so often. And depending upon the criteria for the intermittent nature of this, depending upon how you determine which response gets reinforced, you come up with different types of intermittent schedules. So this is also known as a partial reinforcement schedule, because only some of the responses get reinforced. It's only a partial reinforcement for the responses. And as we're going to see, depending upon when the response is reinforced, you can come up with different types of intermittent schedules. So all of these schedules that we're going to be looking at, these intermittent schedules, have one thing in common, and that is that not every single response is reinforced. So the 4 basic intermittent schedules that we're going to look at today, they come from a combination of 2 components. So much like the contingencies, the 4 contingencies we looked at came from a combination of positive or negative, was something added or was something taken away, and the result, reinforcement or punishment. Did the response increase? Did the response decrease? The same way those 2 were combined to make 4 different contingencies, these 2 components are going to be combined to make 4 different intermittent schedules. So the 2 contingencies are, number 1, is the schedule a ratio schedule or an interval schedule? And then number 2, is it a fixed schedule or is it a variable schedule? So we'll get into what those terms mean exactly, but just to kind of diagram this out for you, a schedule can either be fixed or it can be, it can either be ratio or it can be an interval. If it's a ratio, then what determines whether or not you get reinforced is the number of responses that you've done. So you don't get reinforced on every single response. You get reinforced on, for example, every 5th response. You get reinforced for every 10th response. So if it depends on the number of responses, that's a ratio schedule of reinforcement. If those number of responses are fixed, that is, if you are going to get reinforced on every 10th response, you're going to get reinforced on every 20th response. And you can literally count down the responses until you get reinforced. If it's set, if it's determined how many responses you need, that's a fixed reinforcement schedule. So here we have the fixed ratio, and you'll see the abbreviation FR. This is the fixed ratio schedule. These schedules are important because these schedules lead to different patterns of behavior. So that's why we're analyzing these today. So the other form of a ratio schedule is a variable ratio schedule, where you cannot count down exactly how many responses you need to get to your next reinforcement, but you know on average it's going to be 10 responses. You know on average it's going to be 20 responses. So variable ratio schedules. An example of this would be if you were a salesperson knocking on doors. You know that on average, 1 out of every 10 people that you knock on their door is going to buy your product. But you don't know if it's the next person whose door you knock on. You don't know if you're going to have to knock on another 5 doors. You don't know if you're going to have to knock on another 20 doors. You don't know if you're going to go through a dry spell or you're going to go through a hot spell. But you know on average it takes 10 interactions before you make a sale. That's an example of that variable ratio schedule. So those are the ratio schedules. They are dependent upon how many responses did the organism make. The other type of schedule is an interval schedule. And an interval schedule is determined by how much time has passed since the last reinforcement. How much time has elapsed since the last time somebody got reinforced. So in an interval schedule, it's your first response after an interval has expired that gives you your reinforcement. If that interval is fixed, then you have a fixed interval schedule. So a fixed interval schedule, if you were before the days of direct deposit, where if you were working at a company, you had to go and pick up your check at payroll on Friday afternoon, you knew that you had to wait on Friday afternoon. And you could go there on Monday and they wouldn't have it, and you can go there on Tuesday and they wouldn't have it. You were on a fixed interval 7-day schedule where you had to wait until Friday, and then when you went to the desk and said, "Can I have my pay for the week?" they were like, "Here you go." So it's just one response that's needed, but it's after a fixed interval. And then the last one to round out all 4 possibilities is the variable interval schedule. And this is where you're still on an interval, but this time it's a variable interval. So you don't know how long you have to wait, but you know that it's going to be some amount of time. So this would be something like if you were a farmer, you don't know exactly when your plants are going to bloom. You don't know exactly when your fruit is going to be ripe. But you know that on average you have to wait until August before you can start harvesting. So it doesn't matter if you show up there in July, doesn't matter if you show up there on August 1st, August 2nd, you know that it's going to be a certain amount of time before you can harvest it, but you don't know exactly how much time. It's not like nature is telling you, come here on August 28th and then you can harvest everything. You know that you got to wait a certain amount of time, but you don't know exactly what it is. So those are the 4 basic schedules. So let's take a look again at each of these in turn. So we got the fixed ratio schedule. And again, it's a ratio schedule contingent upon the number of responses. And it's a fixed schedule, so that number is constant. That number does not change. So if a rat was on a fixed ratio schedule, we could write that as an FR20. That is a fixed ratio 20 response schedule. So the lever press will cause the reinforcer of food to be delivered. But if it's on a fixed ratio 20 schedule, that means that food is delivered after 20 presses. So the rat needs to sit there and press once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 19 times, 20 times, then the food is delivered. And then it starts all over again. Once, twice, thrice, 4 times, 5 times, 19 times, 20 times, food is delivered. That's a fixed ratio schedule. You can have a fixed ratio schedule of any duration. You can have a fixed ratio 57 schedule. And what that means is that this rat will be reinforced after 57 lever presses. So a fixed ratio schedule, you know what you have to achieve. You know what you need to do in order to finally get that reinforcer. And the example that we started with of the gamers are typically on a fixed ratio schedule. Fixed ratio schedules are built into many of the games that are part of the current generation of consoles. So if you go back a couple of years and you take a look at the game Skyrim. Skyrim had, like many other games, a leveling up system where you could level up your character depending on quests that you've done, depending on experience points that you've earned. And that leveling up was the reinforcement. You had to earn certain experience points in order to level up. Leveling up was a reinforcement, and you knew exactly how many experience points you needed before you could level up to the next level. So on that first, when you're at level 1, to get to level 2, you needed 100 experience points. That is a fixed ratio 100 intermittent schedule, because you're not rewarded for the first experience point you get. You're not rewarded for the 50th experience point you get. You're not rewarded for the 99th. Only when you get to 100 do you get that reward of leveling up your character. And if you wanted to get to level 3, you then needed 125 experience points. So now you're on a fixed ratio 125 schedule of reinforcement. And as we're going to see, this ratio, this change in the ratio, so it's still a fixed ratio because it's dependent upon a number of responses, in this case a number of experience points. But what they do in video games and in life in general is they stretch your ratio schedule by making it requiring more and more responses in order to get the reinforcement. So for level 4, you're on a fixed ratio 150 schedule. To get to level 5, you're on a fixed ratio 175 schedule, meaning you need to get 175 experience points before you get reinforced. And in each of these cases, very importantly, it is determined by a set number of responses. It's not a variable number of responses. To get to level 25, you need 675 experience points. You need that many operant responses. And Skyrim is an example of a game where the fixed ratio schedules matched the progression that we will accept as human beings, that we will accept as people. And that's why there weren't any massive online campaigns to change Skyrim. Not the case with Star Wars Battlefront 2, where they had fixed ratio schedules built in to their game, but those fixed ratio schedules required way too many responses. So if you want to be playing as Luke Skywalker or Darth Vader, you know, just kind of two of the minor characters in the Star Wars universe, you needed 6,000 credits each. And that would take you, to unlock one hero, it would take you just under 2,500 hours of gameplay. So that is a fixed ratio schedule, right? You need 6,000 credits, right? You know exactly what you need. But in this case, it takes just a massive amount of work, and as you're going to see, that leads to problems. But case in point here, video gaming experience, you are on a fixed ratio schedule of reinforcement where you know exactly what you need to do in order to attain the next reinforcement, in order to attain the next goal. And as we're going to see, that is what causes that continuous type of behavior, or that uninterrupted type of behavior. All right, so that's fixed ratio. Next one, variable ratio schedule. A variable ratio schedule, still a ratio schedule, still depends on the number of responses, but this time the number of responses are variable. They're random. There's a certain average number that are required, but you don't know if your next response is going to get reinforced or if you're going to have to do multiple responses before you get reinforced. So for example, if our rat was on a variable ratio 20 schedule, lever presses will cause food. However, only every 20th response on average is going to get reinforced with food. So anytime that you get reinforced with food, the next session begins, the next sort of trial or segment of the variable ratio schedule begins, but you don't know if you're going to have to press it once to get reinforced again. Maybe you'll have to press it 5 times, maybe you'll get lucky, and in 5 times you'll get reinforced. Maybe you'll have to press 20 times before you get reinforced. Maybe you're on an unlucky run, and you'll have to press 40 times to get reinforced. The only thing you know is that on average, you get reinforced every 20 times. That's a variable ratio 20 schedule. And again, that ratio can be whatever you want. So a variable ratio 57 schedule means that on average, this rat will get reinforced every 57 times that it presses the lever. It doesn't know, again, if the next lever press is going to get reinforced, or if it's going to have to press the lever another 200 times in order to get reinforced. All that the rat knows is that on average, every 57th response is going to get reinforced. All right, so this is the situation that any typical gambler finds himself in. So if you are playing the slot machines, you know eventually you're going to win that jackpot, right? You know that eventually you're going to play that slot machine enough times in order for you to win. But you don't know if it's the next time you press the button, or is it going to be 2 times and then you're going to win, or is it going to be 100 times and then you're going to win? But you know, and it's built into the machine, it's built into the probabilities of the gambling systems, that on average, maybe once every 1,000 turns, you're going to win the huge jackpot. Maybe once every 100 turns, you're going to win a lesser jackpot. And you know that on average, that's going to be the case. So that leads to a very specific type of behavior that we're going to see, where people who gamble on these slot machines, they do not want to interrupt their play. They don't want to take breaks, and as soon as they win, they go right back to playing. It's not like they win and they say, oh, this will be a great time to take a break. As we saw before, they actually get aggravated when they win a jackpot and have to slow down their play. They'll play continuously, and if they win, they'll take their money and boom, just go right back to playing continuously. And this is something that people on a lot of mobile app games have experienced. So Candy Crush, any of those games where you go from one stage to the next stage, you're stuck on a stage, you're trying to pass it, and as soon as you do, you open up the next stage or unlock the next stage. Those games are on a variable ratio schedule of reinforcement. So has anybody played Candy Crush in here or similar games? Okay, so a lot of you are familiar with it. So what would happen in Candy Crush is you would get to a certain level. I think level 181 was like a really hard one. But anyways, you would get to a certain level and you would try it and you would fail. And you would try it again and you would fail. And you would try it again and you would fail. And you knew, because there's a luck component to the game, you knew that eventually you would be able to beat this stage. But you didn't know if it was going to be on your next try, or the try after, or the try after. But you knew after a certain number of tries you were going to beat this particular level. And what oftentimes happens is that if you're playing a particularly difficult level, and you finally beat that level, you don't put the game away and say, you know what, that's enough for now. Typically what people will do is they'll be like, oh my gosh, finally, after 20 tries I beat level 181. Let me try level 182. And you go straight back into it. You don't take a break. And again, it's because of this variable ratio schedule of reinforcement. Beating the level is your reinforcement, and you don't know when you're playing this game if you're going to beat a level on 1 try. Are you going to beat it on 5 tries? Is it going to take you 20 tries, 40 tries before you beat it? And that's that variable ratio schedule of reinforcement. All right, so those are the 2 ratio schedules of reinforcement. The next ones we're going to look at are the interval schedules of reinforcement. And the interval schedules of reinforcement, interestingly, only need 1 response to get reinforced. However, the interval part is that it has to occur after an interval has expired. So it's only the first response after an interval is expired that is rewarded or reinforced. And you can do whatever you want in that intervening interval. You can respond as many times as you want. You can do nothing, and it won't make a difference. All that matters is that when that interval expires, that first response after the interval expires, that's what gets reinforced. So again, it's that first response after the interval has expired. So if our rat here was on a fixed interval 20-second schedule of reinforcement, once again, your lever press is going to get reinforced with food, but only the first lever press after 20 seconds has expired. So it doesn't matter if the rat is there the whole time pressing that bar. All that matters is that when that interval expires, the first bar press after the interval expires, the rat gets food. So the rat that is sitting there just continually pressing the bar, will be reinforced with the same amount of food as a rat that is just sitting there checking its watch. The rat had a watch, checking its watch and going, oh, 20 seconds, boom, thank you. Oh, 20 seconds, boom, thank you. All you need is that one response, and that's what makes it an intermittent reinforcement schedule. Interval has to expire, first response after gets reinforced. So you can be on a fixed interval 20 second, where every 20 second intervals, you get reinforced after that 20 seconds is up. You can be on a fixed interval 57 second, fixed interval 57 second ratio. I'm messing myself up. Fixed interval 57 second schedule of reinforcement, thank you, where food is delivered for the first time after 57 seconds. And again, all you need to do is respond on that after the interval is expired. All you need to do is respond that first time after the interval expires. And if you are a parent and you are regularly checking up on your children, right? So the children are in another room. You want to make sure that they're not playing inappropriately. You want to make sure that they have positive playing experiences, and you want to reinforce positive playing experiences. But you're doing it on a fixed interval schedule. You tell them, look, every 15 minutes I'm coming in here, and I better see some loving and some hugging and some good playing. Well, what these children are going to do is basically they're going to do this for 14 minutes. And then when they sense that 15 minutes is coming close, they'll start doing this. So there's a very specific pattern that you get from these fixed interval intermittent schedules. And again, we're going to see that it's not because they're doing anything unreasonable. It's because of the schedule that was placed, this fixed interval every 15 minutes. Because they're just going to be reinforced for the hugs that they give once that 15-minute interval is done and the door is open. Right? The door is open, the parents look in and they see that and they're like, oh my goodness, my wonderful children playing so well together. You know, I love you guys. Close the door and they go back to this for 14 minutes. 15 minutes comes back, open the door. Oh my gosh, my children, so loving, I can't believe it. Close the door, back to this. It's because of that fixed interval reinforcement schedule. All right, and the last one that we have of the 4 basic schedules is the variable intermittent schedule. And the variable intermittent schedule is once again variable interval schedule. There's so many kind of terms flying around. Variable interval schedule is once again where you have an interval. And as soon as the interval expires, the first response is getting reinforced. However, that interval now is a variable time period. On average, it's a certain length. But it could be a really short interval this time. It could be a really long interval this time. But on average, you know that it's a certain length. That's a variable interval schedule. So for example, the rat here might be on a variable interval 20-second schedule. And what that means is that it will be reinforced for lever pressing with food for the first response after, on average, 20 seconds. So it might be a 40-second interval this time. It might only be a 5-second interval this time. It might be a 20-second interval, but on average, those variable interval lengths are going to be 20 seconds long. Mm-hmm.
Would that be the reason why my dog waits between 4 and 4:30 for my mom to come home? Because he's been trained between that time frame.
So the between 4 to 4:30?
Yeah. So like if I'm home,
Mm-hmm.
he'll just run to the door and wait from 4 to 4:30 for my mom.
And does she kind of come home around that time? Yeah. So that would be an indication of a variable variable interval reinforcement schedule, because sometimes she makes it home at 4:30, sometimes she makes it home at 5. Basically, if your dog is there when she walks through the door, I'm sure the dog is reinforced, with her coming home. So that that's an interval. As a variable interval schedule. So that would be an example of a variable interval 24-hour schedule, where it goes anywhere from like 23 and a half to 24 hours, somewhere in between. So it's it's almost a fixed interval. So if your mom came home at the same time every single day, then that would be a fixed interval schedule of reinforcement. But because it's kind of, a little bit of traffic, she gets caught up somewhere else, it's a variable interval schedule. Mm-hmm. All right, so variable interval schedules again, the duration can be whatever you choose it to be. 20 seconds, in this case 57 seconds. But that interval is that interval can be different at any particular time. So any particular interval in that chain of intervals can be different. But on average, in this case, they're going to be 57 seconds. And in that case, anytime you make a response, you don't know if you have to wait 5 seconds for the next response to be reinforced, or do you have to wait 20 seconds for the next response to be reinforced, or 57 seconds, or is this rat going to have to wait 2 minutes before the next response gets reinforced? It knows on average it's 57 seconds, but again, for any particular iteration, for any particular behavior, it doesn't know if the time has expired yet. And this is what Facebook used to be like back when it was first launched. So back in 2004, when Facebook was first launched, you didn't get the notifications that you can get today. So those push notifications, where you kind of get that either the tone or the vibration in your phone, and you're like, oh, somebody liked my post, and you take a look at it and you go, oh, I got a like on the picture of my breakfast this morning, I guess. That is the push notifications. That took it off of this variable interval scheduled reinforcement. But back in the day, in the dark ages of Facebook, when you had to go online, you had to log in using a web browser, pre-apps, pre-app days, that was a variable interval scheduled reinforcement. So you didn't know if you signed in whether you were going to see that people liked your post and got reinforced. That would be the reinforcement for that. Or you wouldn't know if you had to wait a little bit longer. So you would post something up and you didn't know if somebody was going to see it in 5 minutes and give you a like. You didn't know if somebody was going to see it in an hour and give you a like. You might know on average it's going to take maybe 1 hour before somebody saw it and liked your post. So it led to a certain type of checking on your social media. So people on Facebook, they weren't as addicted as people in a casino on a slot machine. Nobody on their Facebook page, other than your birthday, nobody on your Facebook page was sitting there going, did anybody like my post? No, refresh. No, refresh. No, refresh. No, refresh, right? People didn't do that typically. What they would do is they would sign in the morning and they'd be like, oh, did anybody like my post? No? Okay, close it down. Maybe come back during their lunch break. Oh, did anybody like my post? Oh yeah, I got a couple of likes. Sweet. Like you too, whatever. And then you would close it. And then it would be nighttime. And you'd open it up one more time. You'd be like, did anybody like my post? Oh yeah, here's a few more likes. So you didn't check it constantly, but you checked it at a pretty steady rate. So that kind of changed once the push notifications became a reality. But it's probably going to go back to this variable interval scheduled reinforcement because people these days are getting overwhelmed with push notifications. It's a very distracting thing that just takes cognitive effort to either ignore. So I don't know about you, but whenever I get a push notification on my phone, I can be in the middle of something, and if I see that, I need to check it. Like I just need to be like, what was the email that was sent, or what did somebody tweet? Those are the ones that I get push notifications on. And people are turning those off. And if you turn off your push notifications, you are putting those social media apps back on this interval, this variable interval schedule, where you know if you make a post, eventually people are going to respond to it, but you don't know if it's going to take 5 minutes, you don't know if it's going to take an hour. On average, it might be a certain time, but again, you don't know how much time for any particular post. Excuse me. All right, so why are we identifying these intermittent schedules of reinforcement? We've already kind of alluded to this. We're identifying these because behavior is different for these 4 intermittent schedules of reinforcement. So each of these schedules leads to a very characteristic pattern of behavior. And you can actually determine the schedule of reinforcement based on what the behavior looks like. So for example, I'll give you a practical application of this. If you're a clinical psychologist and a client comes to you and they have some behavior that they're trying to get rid of, right? Say they have a bad behavior, like a gambling addiction, or any other, behavior that they want to get rid of, they want to lessen. If you can determine what the pattern is of their behavior, do you do it constantly? Yes, I do. Do you take breaks? No, I don't. If you can determine their pattern of behavior, you can identify what intermittent schedule of reinforcement they're on. And once you identify the intermittent schedule of reinforcement that they're on, that'll give you a good clue as to the source of their intermittent reinforcement schedule. So identifying the patterns of behavior and determining that link between the reinforcement schedule and the patterns of behavior is a very important thing to be able to do. All right, so let's take a look first at the fixed ratio schedule. So the fixed ratio schedule, we're going to go back to our cumulative response recorder. So here on the y-axis we have cumulative responses. So remember, every single response means that the pen goes up and up and up. So really high slopes indicate very fast rates of behavior. Low slopes, shallow slopes indicate slow rates of behavior. And then we have time here on the x-axis. So as time goes, behavior accumulates. And if somebody is on a fixed ratio schedule of reinforcement, the pattern of their behavior will look like that. It will have a very characteristic step ladder type of pattern. That's what a fixed ratio schedule of reinforcement looks like. So we know that this is fixed ratio because if we analyze the distance between reinforcements, so each of these little dashes here are reinforcements, and if we analyze the distance between any two reinforcements, we can see that there's a certain distance there. That's the number of responses required to get to the next reinforcement. And that number of responses is the same across the entire schedule. So that number of responses needed to go from reinforcement to reinforcement, that's the same regardless of where you are. It's fixed. It's number of responses, fixed ratio, intermittent schedule. And this pattern of behavior that we see here is the pattern of behavior caused by this fixed ratio schedule. So what does this pattern of behavior have? What are some of its key attributes? Well, one of the key attributes is very rapid responding. So if you'll notice, when responses occur, it's a very high slope. It's a very rapid rate of responding. It's the behavior happening over and over and over and over and over again. So rapid responding is one of the key elements. The other key element is this post-reinforcement pause. So you'll notice that after every single reinforcement, there's no responses. The person takes a break. That is a post-reinforcement pause until they decide to start up again, at which point they go very rapidly, and then once they get reinforced, once again, post-reinforcement pause. So you have rapid responding, and rapid responding is followed by a post-reinforcement pause. And notice that this rapid responding is uninterrupted. So there is no break, there's no step here before you get reinforced. So as soon as you get reinforced, you take a break. But then as soon as you start responding, you go and you respond until you get reinforced. So if this was a rat, and the rat just got reinforced with food, the rat would take a break. The rat would say, oh, I just got some food. Let me take a break. And it would take a break, take a break, take a break, take a break. But then as soon as it decided it wanted more food, it would press. And it would press 20 times, and it would do it all in a row. It doesn't go to the bar and say, I'm going to press 5 times, then I'll come back later, finish it maybe after, and then press another 5 times, that's fine. No, all 20 in one shot until it gets reinforced again. Then, once again, post-reinforcement pause. So this is the pattern of behavior that you get from a fixed ratio schedule of reinforcement. So you get a post-reinforcement pause, but when you start responding, it's continuous until you get reinforced. And that is why gamers will not interrupt their gameplay until they've reached the next reinforcement. because they know oftentimes in their games exactly how much responses they need before they get to the next stage, exactly where the next save point is on their map, exactly where, the next, how many more hits do they need to finally kill this boss? How many more experience points do they need before they can finally level up? And the reason they don't want to pause, right? Because again, you can just be playing your game, you need to go somewhere, okay, I'll pause. The reason they don't like to pause is because that is what happens when you're on a fixed ratio schedule of reinforcement. So if your game is built in with fixed ratio schedules, as most of them are, once you start playing, you don't want to stop until the goal is achieved, even though you can actually pause. So that explains the gamers not wanting to leave their consoles. And interestingly, once again, one of the things that a game does, and one of the things that life does as well, is it'll increase your fixed ratio schedule of reinforcement. So if you're a gamer, you've experienced this, leveling up for the first time doesn't take a lot of experience points. Leveling up for the 25th time takes a ton of experience points, right? Beating that first boss, not that hard. Beating that second boss, if you play Final Fantasy, you know all about like the 6-hour bosses that you're fighting. Those are the later stage bosses. That increase is often done in games. It's often done in real life. So think back in your education when you were first learning how to write. You wrote a paragraph, right? Your teacher would say, "Oh, you have a homework assignment, and for this homework assignment, you're going to have to write one paragraph, and that paragraph has to be at least 6 sentences long." And you probably thought at that time in elementary school, "Oh my goodness, how am I going to do this? A whole 6 sentences? Really?" So that was a fixed ratio. You write 6 sentences, you get reinforced. As you go through school, that assignment gets longer, to the point where now you're in university and your professor will say, "You need to write 20 pages, for this particular class, for the research paper." And again, it's a fixed ratio. You got to hit that 20 pages in order to get the full points. It's an increased or stretching of the ratio. One thing to be very careful of when you are stretching a ratio is to avoid ratio strain. And ratio strain is when a person is on a ratio that gets stretched too far too soon, and they basically give up on the entire endeavor. They basically give up responding. So this is something that did not happen in Skyrim, but definitely happened in Battlefront 2. Ratio strain was very apparent because, again, their fixed ratios of reinforcement were just way too big at the beginning of the game. You have to have way too many credits. You basically have to invest in 2,500 hours of play before you can get some of the most basic characters that are there. And ratio strain, let me just back it up here. Does anybody know what it is about ratio strain? Why does ratio strain occur? Why wouldn't somebody just say, "All right, I need to go, 6,000 credits. I'll just do, 60,000 credits. I'll just do 60,000 credits." What is it? I'll give you a hint. When you're not getting reinforced here, what's going on?
Some form of extinction or elimination.
Exactly. These intermittent schedules have extinction built into them. So every single time you make a response, but you don't get reinforced, that's an extinction trial. That's the definition of extinction. You respond, but you don't get reinforced. So any of these schedules, you can think of it as a race between extinguishing, going through extinction in the response where the person just gives up, or getting reinforced so that they'll keep in the pattern. So that's why you need to avoid ratio strain whenever you're increasing your intermittent schedules, because if you increase it too far, too fast, like in Star Wars Battlefront, people will just give up and say, "You know what, I paid $80 for this game, I still got to download a patch so that it works, and it's just too much to get Luke Skywalker, so forget it, I don't even want to play." That's why it happened. It was ratio strain. All right. that was a fixed ratio schedule of reinforcement. Next one, variable ratio schedule. In a variable ratio schedule of reinforcement, once again, very distinctive pattern. So, fixed ratio schedule, we have that nice step-up pattern with the rapid responding post-reinforcement pause. We don't have that pattern in a variable ratio. Variable ratio schedule causes this pattern here. So we know that it's a variable ratio schedule because the number of responses required between reinforcements, so again, these dashes here are when the individual gets reinforced. So you can see in this case, there was a very few number of responses needed before somebody got reinforced. But over here, there was a large number of responses that were required before somebody got reinforced. And you can see that the distance between reinforcement is different all over the place. And that is a variable ratio schedule. So you don't know how many responses it's going to take you to go from here to here, because you don't know if you're here in this situation, so you need a lot of responses before you get reinforced, or are you here in this situation, where you only need a few more responses before you get reinforced again. That's the essence of the variable ratio schedule. And the pattern that it leads to is this very consistent pattern here, which is characterized by two things, once again. Number one, rapid responding. That is a high slope. People on a variable ratio schedule of reinforcement, they sit there and they press that bar. If you put a rat on a variable ratio schedule of reinforcement, it will just sit there and press that bar very, very quickly. And the other characteristic here, it's uninterrupted. There's no post-reinforcement pause because there's no point in taking a break because you don't know. Maybe it's the next one that's going to be reinforced, right? You just got reinforced. Maybe the next one is just one response away. So you just continue to go, and there is no stopping. So it's a combination of rapid responses, and that step is gone. That post-reinforcement pause is gone. So as soon as you get reinforced, you just keep going until the next, until the next, until the next. And this is what looks like addictive behavior. So this is what happens with slot machine players, because slot machine players are on a variable ratio schedule of reinforcement. They don't know if the next time they press the button they're going to win, or if it's going to take 5 times before they win, or if it's going to take 20 times before they win. And then once they get reinforced, they don't leave. They just keep playing and going over and over and over again. So that is, again, not because of any sort of malfunction in their brain. It's because slot machines are on a variable ratio schedule of reinforcement, and that causes this constant high rate of behavior with no pause whatsoever. And this is what a lot of your apps, gaming apps, have as well. So Candy Crush is a perfect example of this, where if you were on a level, you didn't know if you were going to beat that level the first time you played. You don't know if you were going to beat that level the second time you played, the 5th time you played, the 10th time you played. And then once you beat a particular level, you started the next level right away. So once you beat level 181, you're like, oh my gosh, finally I beat level 181. I'm going to start with level 182. You didn't pause. You didn't put it down and say, that's enough for today. And that's why people who use these apps as a form of a break, for example, from doing work, from studying, oftentimes find themselves down the rabbit hole 2 hours in because you never feel like taking a break because of the variable ratio schedule that these games have built in. All right. So those were the ratio schedules. Let's take a look at the intermittent schedules. First off, we'll start with the fixed intermittent schedule. And this is a favorite of behavioral psychologists because it has the coolest looking pattern of behavior. And once again, we have our cumulative recorder. And this is the pattern of behavior for a fixed interval schedule of reinforcement. And we know it's a fixed interval because if we now go to the time dimension here, the time axis, you can see that the time between this reinforcement and this reinforcement is the same as the time between those two is the same as the time between those two. So the number of responses is very different, but the time is fixed. So that is a fixed interval schedule of reinforcement. And this is what the pattern looks like for a fixed interval schedule of reinforcement. This is known as a scalloped pattern. because it literally looks like people scooped this pattern out of a hillside. So this one has a post-reinforcement pause. So you can see that after reinforcement, there's no responding. And why would you? Because after reinforcement, you know your interval just expired. So now you have to wait before the next interval is over. But you get this scallop pattern, this increasingly rapid responding as the interval gets close. And this is only for organisms that don't have watches. So if you are relying on your own internal timing mechanism, this is the pattern that you're going to get, right? Where you increase that rapid responding. So once again, that's that scalloped response where you have that post-reinforcement pause once you get reinforced, and then increased responding until you get reinforced again. And this is why if the response you're trying to decrease is fighting, a fixed interval schedule is a horrible idea, because what's going to happen is that after reinforcement, there's going to be after reinforcement of this positive behavior, there's going to be a post-reinforcement pause, i.e. a period where there's no positive behavior. That is, your children are going to be fighting. And then, as soon as that interval is about to expire, what's going to happen with these children is they're going to be sitting right about here. The door just opened, and they were reinforced. The parent opened the door and said, "Oh my goodness, my children hugging and loving each other. How wonderful. Extra dessert for you guys tonight. Yay." Door closes, fighting, 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 fighting. They know that the parent comes every 15 minutes, and there's no clock in the playroom. Right around 12 minutes, they're going to start saying, "You know what, let's kind of hug a little bit. No, I don't want to hug, I want to fight." Right about 13 minutes, they're going to be like, "Let's keep hugging. No, I want to go back to fighting." Right about 14 minutes, "Let's hug, let's hug." Right about 14 minutes and 30 seconds, "Let's really hug." Like, hug it out, like, "Oh my gosh." Right about 14 minutes and 59 seconds, super rapid responding. Door opens. "Oh my goodness, my children, how wonderful to see you guys playing together. Makes me really happy." Door closes. Fight, 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 fight. Until the 12-minute mark, maybe we should start hugging again. And that's the pattern. That's what you're going to get from that particular schedule of reinforcement. Which is why, if you want to increase positive behaviors, what you would want to do is you would want to reinforce your children on the next schedule of reinforcement, which is the variable interval schedule. So if, on the other hand, the children knew that you checked in on them every 15 minutes on average, but they don't know if it's going to be 20 minutes, they don't know if it's going to be 5 minutes, they don't know if you're going to open up the door and be like, "Oh my gosh, look at my children playing so nicely. I'm going to see you guys in a while." Close the door and then just open the door up again, right? Variable interval schedule. They don't know. And if you're on a variable interval schedule, that's your pattern of behavior. So the hugs are going to occur throughout the entire time, because you don't know when the interval is going to expire. So in this case, we have intervals, once again on the time dimension. That's the interval between reinforcements. It's only that first response after the interval is ended that gets reinforced, but it's a variable interval. And you don't know if the interval is going to be big, you don't know if the interval is going to be small, you don't know if it's going to be really big. You don't know what that interval is. It's a variable interval. It's a variable interval schedule. Now, this one and the variable ratio schedule are the hardest to distinguish just visually, because there's really only one difference between the two, and that has to do with the rate of responding. Typically, a variable interval schedule, like we have here, will lead to moderate rates of responding. So not that rapid responding you get on a variable ratio schedule, it'll be a moderate rate of responding. And what makes it difficult to identify in the real world is what's moderate versus rapid, right? Where do you draw the line? So this is the one where if you found a continuous rate of behavior, because it does share that, there's no post-reinforcement pause. If you don't know what interval it is that you're on, you're going to keep hugging, and once you get reinforced, you don't know if your parents are coming back in the next 5 seconds. You might as well keep hugging and have that positive behavior. So there's no post-reinforcement pause, but there's a moderate rate of responding for the variable interval rather than a very rapid rate of responding for the variable ratio. And this variable interval schedule is what Facebook used to be on. So when you had to log in to your Facebook page, when you actually had to open up your Facebook app, pre-push notifications, and again now maybe post-push notifications once people are turning those off, but when you had to do this, again, you didn't know whether somebody had liked your post or not until you logged in. But it took a while for people to check your post. It took a while for people to like your post. It took a while for your social media to get reactions. So you didn't know if it was going to be 5 seconds after you posted. I'm sure we've all had that experience where we share something and literally like 5 seconds later somebody's like, oh, I like that photo. Or if you share something and an hour later somebody likes it, you don't know how long it's going to take. It's on a variable interval. So because of that, people when they were checking their Facebook accounts and their social media accounts before, and now probably once they turned off those push notifications, what they did is they checked it at a moderate rate of responding. So they didn't sit there going, okay, refresh, 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 refresh. That's a rapid rate of responding. It was on a variable interval schedule, so they checked it moderately. They said, all right, it's the morning, I'm having my coffee, let me check my Facebook. Oh, I got a couple of likes, that's cool, put it away. Later on in the day, I'm having my mid-morning break, let me check it again. Oh, okay, no likes, that's fine, put it away. They didn't check it continuously, they checked it maybe 3, 4, 5 times during the day. Moderate rate of responding. And notice, no post-reinforcement pause. So it wasn't like they said, oh, I remember that post that I made. Oh, so-and-so liked my post. Cool. I guess I'm going to go off Facebook for a month. Right? Nobody quit Facebook after noticing their post got liked because there was no post-reinforcement pause. It was a steady, moderate rate of behavior. All right, so those are the 4 basic intermittent schedules. Any questions on those or how to identify the patterns of behavior? All right, last thing we're going to do today is we're going to take a look at non-contingent schedules. So we took a look at the 4 basic intermittent schedules of reinforcement. The last one we're going to take a look at is the non-contingent schedules of reinforcement. And this is where you get reinforcement, but it's not contingent upon any operant response. It's almost just like a bonus. It's almost just like a gift that has been given to you. And these have been studied. And what has been found is that non-contingent schedules, they generally lead to very low rates of response and very poor performance. So if you're trying to increase the frequency of a response, which is one of the effects of reinforcement, or increase the intensity of a response, basically increase the quality of a response, reinforcement schedules will do that. Non-contingent schedules will not. So non-contingent schedules are because of this, they're very rare in the real world, right? They're very rare to actually find situations where there's a non-contingent schedule of reinforcement. So something like a trust fund baby who's going to inherit millions of dollars, whether or not they graduate college, whether or not they actually have a job, regardless of what kind of person they are, they're going to inherit these millions of dollars. That's a non-contingent schedule of reinforcement. As you can imagine, that's not very motivating to go out and increase your skills and make those changes. So I don't know if there's any trust fund babies in here, but I'm definitely sure that all of us were children at some point. And in our culture, one of the most widespread non-contingent schedules of reinforcement is the idea that if you're bad at Christmas, you're going to get coal in your stocking. So that is, everybody knows that? Do they still say that? Okay, so it's not so outdated. So Santa's got his list, he's checking it twice. And if you're on that naughty list, you're going to get coal in your stocking. This was a non-contingent schedule of reinforcement because I have never met a child who has ever received coal in their stocking, regardless of how bad they were. So has anybody here ever woken up on Christmas morning, went to their stocking and said, no, coal? Exactly. All right, now there's 2 possibilities. Either all of you are angels or this is a non-contingent, Christmas is a non-contingent schedule of reinforcement. So I don't know what kind of monster you would need to be in order, these are two child murderers in that they murder children. I think you got to go basically to that limit before you would end up with not a Christmas gift, right? So I can't imagine, again, and I've seen this with children, you know, people, their parents will warn them, you better be good or Santa's not going to bring you any gifts. And they're horrible little children. And low on Christmas morning, they get gifts anyway. That's a non-contingent schedule of reinforcement. And as you can imagine, it's not good at changing performance. It's not good at changing bad behavior into good behavior if your reinforcement is not contingent upon that good behavior. All right, so you might think to yourself, well, that's just, you know, children being children, right? We were all children at one point. We all had to learn about contingencies. Maybe that's just because children don't know how contingencies operate. It works for everybody, even professional players. So there was a study done on professional baseball players. And what happens when you're a pitcher in the major leagues? Okay, so these are top professionals. These are people that have dedicated their lives to pursuing excellence in this sport. These are people who, when you know they were in college and their friends were like, oh, we're going to a party on Friday night, you want to come? They're like, no, I got to do my workout, I got to put in my practice innings, you guys go without me. These are people that dedicated their entire life to achieving excellence in this. So these are major league baseball players. These are the super successful ones. So they did a study on them in terms of how many innings did they pitch. And in a standard major league contract, you have your first years where you are performance-based in your contract. So it depends upon how many games you've played. It depends upon how well you've done, how much money you make during those years. Then once your rookie contract expires, you sign a guaranteed contract. So if they want you on their team, they'll sign you a guaranteed contract. And a guaranteed contract is a non-contingent reinforcement schedule, where it's in the name. You are guaranteed to make that money. So if you were to sign this guaranteed contract and injure your arm permanently right there, you would still make the millions of dollars that were promised to you, whether or not you played a single game. So this is that non-contingent reinforcement. And what they found was that if you take a look at the performance of pitchers, pre that guaranteed contract, when they're on this contingent reinforcement schedule, their performance increases. They pitch more, until they sign that guaranteed contract. And then after that, their performance declines. They pitch less and less and less. And the argument was that this was because it was on a non-contingent schedule of reinforcement. Pitching games was no longer reinforced. Basically, you were guaranteed to get that, whether or not you had that particular performance. All right, so I wanted to, we'll just kind of put this out there, and we'll pick this up next time. So I'll give you a couple of days to kind of think about this. But this is an example. Well, first off, what is this an example of? This type of a design. We've seen it before when we were taking a look at single subject designs. Is this a simple comparison, reversal design, multiple baseline?
Like your A and B comparison?
Yes. So this is an A and B comparison. Actually, I think we can tackle this right now. This is an A and B comparison, right? Signed contract, that's the treatment, right? You are now on a non-contingent scheduled reinforcement. So that's the treatment, that signed guaranteed contract. This is before the treatment. This is your baseline condition. So this is your A, this is your B. So this decline could be due to a signed guaranteed contract. But this decline could also be due to other things. So what might this decline in pitching be due to? Any suggestions?
Age.
What's that?
Age.
Okay, so one possibility is age. These pitchers over here, they're older than they were over here. So this might have to do with the fact that they're getting older, their bodies aren't holding up as much, they need more rest between games. So the decline might have nothing to do with the non-contingent schedule. It might have to do with age. Any other ideas? Injury. So they might be more prone to injury at this point. Anything else? So rotator cuff, I think, would be put there in injury as well for the lesser pitchers. So what do you do if you're in the major leagues? I hope this is what you do. If you're in the major leagues and you have yourself a great pitcher and you want to make sure that they're good in the postseason, that they're going to be okay in the latter half of the season, what do you do during the regular season? You rest them. You rest them a little bit more than usual. Right? So you let them pitch 5 innings, but then you put in the reliever. You don't make them go the full 9, innings that they might do over here. So when you sign that guaranteed contract, basically signing that guaranteed contract means that you're one of the best out there. You're not going to get a guaranteed contract if you're a horrible pitcher, right? So you get that guaranteed contract. So that means that you're a good pitcher. So this decline might be due to the fact that they're on a non-contingent schedule of reinforcement. It also could be due to the fact that they're getting older. It also could be due to the fact that they're more injury prone. It also could be due to the fact that they're being rested to make sure that they're fresh for the big games. It could be due to a number of different factors. So if we wanted to test whether or not it was the guaranteed contract that was leading to this decline, what is it that we would have to do here? We would have to take it away. So if there was a follow-up study that saw what happens after the guaranteed contract, if there was a follow-up study that said, all right, after the 4 years of our guaranteed contract, what happens to the pitchers that are placed back on a performance-based contract? So if that's taken away, if we use that reversal design, and all of a sudden the innings pitched increases, that would be good evidence that it was due to the signed guaranteed contract. It was due to that non-contingent schedule of reinforcement. If, on the other hand, the performance continued to be low, that would indicate that it's probably due to age or injury or other strategies. But again, we would need to reverse this treatment and go back to that pay for performance contingent reinforcement schedule. All right, any final questions, comments before we wrap it up for today? All right, so that is it for today. So we didn't have the social media development thing for today. We're going to do that in the next class just because we're coming up on the fall break. So we'll do it for a bit of an extended period of time. But other than that, we are done for today.